Welcome to another episode of The International Classroom, the podcast that explores ideas and innovations in education across the globe. I'm your host, Alex Gray, and today we have an incredible guest, an international consultant, author, and speaker with extensive experience in education, leadership, and most notably, artificial intelligence. If you're curious about the role of AI in education, good or bad, this episode is for you. Leon, thank you ever so much for joining me on the International Classroom podcast today. Just a very simple question to kick us off. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thanks for the invite. So my name's Leon Furze. I am a PhD student studying artificial intelligence and education, and I'm also an education consultant and an author. Up until the end of last year, I was Director of Learning and Teaching at a regional Catholic college in Victoria in Australia. And prior to that, I've been all kinds of roles: head of English, head of year level, had a bit of a dabble in head of IT digital. So, I've been on this journey for a little while in artificial intelligence, but only started the research in November last year, 2 weeks before ChatGPT was launched. And it's been a bit of a ride since then.
So that's probably more coincidental than anything else.
My supervisor, who is really invested in this area as well, Lucinda McKnight, was writing about GPT and writing tools for years. So she wrote a piece in The Conversation in 2021, and she and I had a few conversations on the run up to the release of ChatGPT, but really nobody saw that coming, and it's obviously brought it to everybody's awareness.
Yeah, I was speaking with a couple in the UK who've released this program called Real Fast Reports, and they said, we've been working on this for a year, and then ChatGPT comes out in November, and all of a sudden AI is in the mainstream, whereas previously no one had really heard about it, was using it. It really has just blown up, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So we've picked a good time to start this research project, but Lucinda's been working in this area for a few years, so we've got some good background material too.
Fantastic. So how did you get into AI? How did you end up, being interested in it?
I've always had this kind of digital technologies computing background myself from when I was in school, but I ended up doing my undergraduate in English and American literatures, and then went down the path of becoming an English teacher and really heavily invested in English teaching. When I was head of English, I joined our state association for English teachers, VEIT, and that's where I met Lucinda the first time, my supervisor. She and I had a few conversations over the years, and then in term 2 last year, I decided that I was going to wrap up in the classroom for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which came from our experiences during remote learning, which I really enjoyed remote learning, having a bit more time here on the farm with my kids. And we got talking. I'd handed in my notice, and Lucinda offered to support a scholarship application in artificial intelligence and digital writing. So it kind of brought those two areas, my old long-standing interest in digital technologies and my interest in English teaching, together really nicely.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, I came across you on LinkedIn, and I'm sure probably a lot of people are coming across you there. And it seems that every time I log in, and I would have always said about myself, I'm very LinkedIn heavy. I like LinkedIn. Not necessarily always prolific, but one of those. But the amount and the sheer quality of things that you are posting consistently about it on LinkedIn is, I would say, you are prolific. I even came across something yesterday. Someone else had posted and said, right, in the terms of, almost said 2 sages, 2 of the people you want to go to. If you want to learn about AI, I can't remember the other person's name, but then there was your name. So it seems at the moment, prolifics in terms of, but it also, yeah, I would say that. But it also brought up this book that you've got as well, that seems to merge these 2 things together.
So I mean, I do a lot of writing, and I think one of the reasons I'm so prolific on LinkedIn is because I don't go anywhere near really any other social media platforms. So all my attention goes into LinkedIn. But I sort of, now that I've left the school system, most of my consultancy and professional development work is aligned with my writing. So, I've got a book out for English teachers, Practical Writing Strategies, which has just come out at almost exactly the same time as some contributions to a book over in the States. So Stephen Beauchard's book, Chat Brackets GPT. and my contribution to Stefan's book was an essay on the impact that AI has had in Australia, in terms of how Australian educators have really started to adopt and really investigate these technologies, plus a chapter in there on AI policy for secondary schools, which is something that I'm just kind of personally interested in. So yeah, you'll see a lot of me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of blog writing. I normally have sort of 2 or 3 blog posts a week. And then often what happens is the blog posts spin out into something bigger. So one blog post on AI policy, for example, turned into the chapter in the ChatGPT book.
Yeah, that's quite... I think a lot of people out there, myself included, have not thought about AI policies in secondary school. There's a lot of people talking at the moment, isn't there, regarding, they're just seeing all the positives of that. But there are the dark sides. I think you've written a few blogs about that and what you're talking about, AI ethics. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So I started the PhD, obviously, and started really digging into the reading in December, maybe. So sort of playing around with early ChatGPT at the same time as getting into some of the heavier research around AI. And it doesn't take long scratching the surface of AI research before you start to get into some of the ethical complications, because it's a massively complex and problematic technology. So I always recommend Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. So any of your listeners who are looking for something as a good starting point, that book does, it's a real eye-opener in terms of not just the obvious ethical considerations, so bias and discrimination baked into the AI. I think most people know that these AI systems can be biased, but there's environmental concerns. There's these concerns with human labor and how they label the data. There's concerns with how they reinforce oppressive power structures and how they marginalize individuals. There's a real, a complex kind of milieu of ethical concerns, which I think if we're going to bring it into classrooms, and we are certainly bringing it into classrooms, we've got to put that on the table as well. We can't just turn away from the ethical issues.
Yeah, you're almost just using the surface layer, aren't you, without really understanding or being aware of what's underneath and what's contributed to what you're getting. A friend of mine, we were talking about the report writing system, and he said, if we are going to use AI and we're part of this community, then it's our responsibility to let the community know that we are using AI, especially to write the report. So, because that's the question now, isn't it, regarding integrity? It's use of AI has brought so much question into what is authentic and what is AI driven. I think it's important that we can understand, as I say, the ethics that come into it. Listening to you speak, then you've only got a slight Australian twang sometimes. How long have you been out in Australia for?
I came out at the end of 2009. So my wife's Australian. We live here on the family farm in southwest Victoria, but we met over in Europe. So all of my undergraduate and my literature experience and my early teaching was done in England. I trained in Stoke, which is where I grew up. And you sound like you're not too far away from Stoke yourself, a little bit further north.
South, actually.
South. Okay, yeah. I've picked it in the wrong direction.
I'll let you carry on. I've got a real myriad of accents, but yeah, please, pray tell.
You sound like my brother-in-law, and he's from Bolton. We've got a real kind of dichotomy with my education experience, because I came out of teacher training in Stoke, which is really low socioeconomic background, some real battling schools there. Then I taught in London for a little while, in an all-boys school in northeast London, which again was a bit hairy. And then moved out here to southwest Victoria to a very kind of agricultural community, and a whole different kind of student, really. But it's been really productive and exciting living in Australia for the last 12 years, and I think the education community out here is fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say, apart from not just noticing you on LinkedIn, a lot of people that I come across who are putting out really valuable content for AI and general education stuff, a lot of them do seem to be deriving themselves from Australia. How does the education system compare?
Oh, look, it's been a while since I was in the UK education system. When I was teaching there, two of the schools that I worked at were Ofsteded, and I know that Ofsted is really hot in the press at the moment, and teacher shortages and attrition in the UK is even worse than it is over here in Australia. But we have similar problems. So I obviously work now in a tertiary university context, and I see the problems in getting and retaining quality applicants to initial teacher education. And I've just, I'm one of the statistics. I've just left secondary school education myself, and the school that I left has had challenges finding staff because it's a regional school. I don't know of any schools that I've spoken to in Australia recently that haven't had problems. So, I mean, bringing that back around to that AI conversation, I'm seeing a lot of narrative around how AI can reduce teacher workload, how it can make certain processes more effective or more efficient. I've seen a little bit of that narrative of threat of, will AI replace teachers? So all of that's coming into the mix whilst we're in the middle of this teacher shortage.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think in one way it looks like it's going to help, and the other side it looks like it could be also another factor that drives people out of jobs. It's a fine balance to scratch, isn't it? But going back to where you thought I was from, Burton-on-Trent is my nearest.
Just down the river.
Literally just down the river, yeah. So I grew up playing rugby there, went to school just outside, but I'm kind of grew up in a tiny little village between Lichfield and Burton-on-Trent. But my wife's from Yorkshire, and all my dad's side of the family are from Manchester. Mum's side of the family are all from Birmingham. So I get this real dependent on who I'm speaking with, and then from an international perspective, you got me and my wife, slightly different accents. My eldest daughter, kind of a little bit in between, and then my youngest daughter sounds completely American. It's just Dubai lifestyle. It's growing up watching probably American TV, I think.
My kids sound English, but I always say that's because they listen to a lot of audiobooks and things like Enid Blyton. So it's nothing to do with me.
All right. So we kind of scratched the surface of this, but obviously you're kind of out of the classroom a little bit now, but still advocating and really promoting and researching this use of AI. So just in terms of what you've seen, we want to talk a little bit and get both sides of the coin for this. But in terms of your perspective, your research, what do you think are sort of some of the benefits that we are seeing come through and could be for the use of AI in education?
I think that one benefit is the scale of adoption, and some of that's because of the publicity behind ChatGPT and how that kind of rolled out. But I've never seen anything on this scale in education before in terms of a new technology coming out and people being so proactive in adopting it. So, I've been kicking around in education for long enough to have seen things like Wikipedia roll out, and in my own education, Google search rolling out. And I saw how slow to respond to those things the education system was. Even YouTube, YouTube has been banned in some sectors for nearly 15 years before they started to peel those bans back officially. Whereas what we're seeing here is such a rapid discussion around these technologies. So yes, some of the states in Australia banned ChatGPT before the start of term one. We're 10 weeks later, and many of those conversations are now revisiting that ban, and they're saying, okay, so we're not going to be able to sustain this. We know that Microsoft's releasing its products. We know that Google's releasing its products. So how are we going to actually deal with it? So to go from a total ban to a conversation about how we're going to adapt to these technologies in a 10-week period for a government sector education system, I think that's an intensely fast turnaround given the general pace of change in education. So I think that the most positive thing is that it's being taken seriously as a level up from any of the previous kinds of technologies that we've experienced.
Yeah. I mean, you have that divide, don't you, in terms of state and is it independent, you call it out there? So fee-paying schools.
Yeah, state, independent, and Catholic are our three main sectors, and the independent sector covers, some of your grammar school types, but also some of your non-Catholic religious schools. So some of the Muslim, Jewish, Christian, non-Catholic schools. So those are the three broad sectors.
And have they all had the same restraints placed on them, or is it just for the state schools?
It was only the state schools that officially locked it down. Varying from state to state, whether it was for staff and students or just for students. And in South Australia, actually, as a lone state, they never banned at all, even in the department government schools. But the independent schools largely have been just doing it sort of school by school. They haven't had a sectoral approach. And the Catholic sector is split into dioceses, and they've all had their own approaches to it there as well. So it's been really fractious.
Does that make it challenging then to kind of see some of the best practices with it and provide evidence to the state schools? Like, look, this is what's going on in these schools. This is why you should be using it.
I think it has muddied the waters a little bit, but look, still in my experience, probably a lot of teachers and students who just haven't used these technologies either. So I think one thing that we have to be mindful of is, we're right in there. We're playing around with it, or we're using it for work, or we're researching it, or whatever. And we assume that everybody knows about ChatGPT because it's been so huge in the news. But I'm still talking to teachers and students regularly who've, they've never signed up to it. They're only operating on secondhand information. So I think the biggest part of the puzzle at the moment is still awareness raising and still just remembering that we're only a few months into this kind of current wave of this technology.
So if a teacher came up to you then when you're running around the school and said, look, hey, Leon, I've seen this about you. How can I get into this? What should I be doing? What would be kind of your top recommendations for those teachers that are just kind of dipping their toe in the water, as it were?
So I've done a bit of work that's based on one of those blog posts that I wrote. So I wrote a blog post on practical strategies for teachers using ChatGPT. And that post just went bananas. My blog was typically for English teachers and English teachers in Victoria, quite specifically. And I wrote this blog post, and it's racked up thousands of hits. And I think the reason that resonated was because it breaks down how to use ChatGPT into 6 areas of teacher workload. So I think my advice for teachers is to get in and experiment with how you can use it in your own workflow. So I broke it up sort of almost arbitrarily into how you can use it for assistance with planning, like lesson planning, unit planning, how you can use it to refresh old units of work, how you can use it to improvise on the fly in lessons, generate questions, that kind of things, personalization, differentiation, and then how you can use it for collaborating and communicating with colleagues or students or parents even. So I think, that's the approach for me, is for teachers to get in and experiment for themselves how they can use the technology as part of their day-to-day.
Thank you for tuning in to the International Classroom Podcast. If you're enjoying today's episode and want to stay up to date on future episodes, be sure to follow and subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you want to watch our episodes and get more tips for success as an international teacher, you can also find us on YouTube. Head over to Deep Teaching and hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a comment and let us know your thoughts on today's episode. If you have any questions or want to share your own tips and experiences, feel free to reach out to us via any of our social media platforms, and we'll be happy to hear from you. Thanks again for listening.
Oh, just lost you for a second there.
Yeah, I thought that. I've got you back. We've got you back. There we go. It's that 7-hour time difference the internet's having to do.
We just had a big rain cloud pass overhead, and I'm on the farm with satellite broadband, so it does occasionally drop out when the weather changes.
I was curious about farming when you said you're on there. Is it an agriculture, or is it like a livestock farm?
It's a big sheep farm. Quite a lot of cattle on here as well. A bit of Angus, that's my brother-in-law's, but the main property is a sheep farm.
So does that mean you've got to muck in?
Look, I don't really. I've got soft hands. I don't do a great deal on the farm, but I can ride a motorbike if absolutely necessary.
I was going to say, if Hollywood has taught me anything, then moving to Australia farms, you'll be on a quad or a motorbike just going around.
Well, that's my brother-in-law. He came out from Bolton to Australia, and he's glued to the quad.
Amazing lifestyle. Having just gone through that, so we've kind of got the benefits of it, things that OpenAI, ChatGPT, AI in general is going to allow us to do. But we touched on it earlier about the ethical side. There's got to be challenges here, isn't it? And you've kind of addressed one of them in skills. Do you think we're going to see a shift in professional development and courses for upskilling staff on the use of AI and the use of technology in the future?
Yeah, look, I think we have to. When Microsoft announced its Copilot, so that's its AI integration into its whole Office suite, Outlook, its emails, everything's getting an injection of AI. And at the moment, they're only running that out at business enterprise level. But that will inevitably make its way into education software. I think once they perfect or get as close to possible as perfecting their guardrails and the safety features, I think it's inevitable that both Google and Microsoft will integrate AI across all their education software, and that means that there's going to be a growing divide between teachers and students who can use these technologies and those that can't. So I think there's a real imperative on schools to be proactive and to give their teachers professional development around using these technologies. And that might be something really simple, like starting with ChatGPT, because it's got a really low barrier to entry. You don't have to have any technical skills. You literally just ask it questions like a chatbot. And then maybe to move on to using some of the AI features that will be integrated into Office, PowerPoint, Excel, all of those apps that we use every day.
Yeah. Yeah, because even something I use, I don't know if you come across Notion.
Yeah, I use Notion.
Yeah, so even they've integrated into it, their AI into it, and it's getting there. Like hit the space bar, type in the question or the thing that you want, and the output is not bad. But again, you kind of have to remember that a lot of these companies that are using it are really in their first edition, as it were, aren't they? And
that comes back to that what we were saying earlier about not assuming that everybody knows about ChatGPT. You have to also assume that these technologies are just going to they're going to scale and they're going to improve on a really fairly rapid curve. Like we're in the end of March, and Notion released its AI integration about like a month ago. It's a bit sketchy, it's okay. It can pull some action items out of a summary of a document or whatever, and it's hit or miss whether it gets it right. But 6 months from now, it'll probably be on its next version, and it'll be improved beyond what we know now.
Exactly. It is worrying though, isn't it, in terms of we always talk about the educational gap in terms of those that have and those that don't. Do you think that's with this, obviously, because we're kind of not necessarily putting all our eggs in the one basket of technology, but to some extent it kind of feels like we are in certain countries. Do you think that's going to broaden this gap? And is there any way that we could potentially pull it back for some of the countries or states that maybe aren't doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of calls outside of education for people to put the brakes on these big AI projects because they're developing so rapidly that we don't have the guardrails up at the moment. We don't have policy, we don't have regulation, we don't have laws. I think in education, we've got to think on a similar kind of scope. So, I've seen two extremes, the banning and blocking, and let's just, hope it goes away. And then the other extreme is a total no holds barred AI everywhere adoption, which I think is equally unhelpful, because that's giving these AI producing companies, these organizations, free reign really to do what they want with student data, with our personal data, all of these things. So I think we have a responsibility in education to ask a few awkward questions of these organizations as they try and come into our schools.
Yeah. And this is, again, a misconception, and I'm happy to be corrected, but a lot of the programs and applications that educators are already using do contain elements of AI. Who was it? Mo Gorfat, an author. He used to work with Google X. I was listening to him on a podcast, but he was advertising his new book, and it's called Scary Smart. And it was literally talking about all these AI integrations and things that we're not really probably even aware of. Like, I'll give you an example. I went into Mall of the Emirates yesterday, and obviously you pull up to the gate, you take a ticket, but what you realize is there's a camera there that's scanning and taking photos of your registration plate, so that when you then come to leave, you go to put no, don't even need to put my ticket in, because it's the camera on the other side has recognized your plate. Now that in some way is going to have elements of AI or the components in there. Then you take that into school, you've got all these, let's say at the moment it's like exam season, we're just about to get into it, all these different applications that we use for creating or giving practice questions, videos, questions, marking, feedback. they all have small components. There's a company Sentry openly go, yeah, we use AI. No one bats an eyelid at that. It's more, I think people are concerned with, oh, hang on a minute, I can ask it a question and it gives me a written response. That just seems to be the only parameter that has changed or that people now are more aware of in terms of what it can do. But that's kind of always been there. Like you said, you've been looking at AI for years prior to this. It's always been there. I think one thing that you said earlier that really stood out for me was about policy. About, we talk about now, we need a digital strategy, we need a digital policy in our school about safe use of iPads, safe use of the internet, safe use of this. Right? Actually, the safe use of AI, and really thinking about that policy would be a smart idea if we are going to integrate it. So, long question or long part coming into it. Like, if you were someone out there who is going to construct a policy for AI, what would be the key points that you would put into it?
I think the big red flags around the ethical concerns would be good components to think about with a policy in schools. So bias and discrimination, we know that because of the way these language models, these large language models like ChatGPT are constructed, they contain biased information from their data sets, which means they can output biased information. Whether or not they put security measures in place to limit them from doing that, they can still result in biased output. So we've got to be conscious of the fact that students might be exposed to harmful output, basically, if we use these systems, and what we're going to do to mitigate that. So on a policy level, that might be only working with trusted organizations that have got a very explicit approach to limiting that risk for harm. We're going to see a lot of people capitalizing on AI, a lot of people developing apps, a lot of developers using the GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 API and building their own apps. But how many of those developers have got security and safety in mind? And that will dictate, I think, what apps we allow into schools or we encourage in schools. I think that there's a huge environmental concern with AI. And if schools are going to have sustainability practices in their policies, which most do now, many schools would have a policy internally around their energy consumption, around the use of recycled water. And I'm talking in an Australian context here, but sustainability is really huge on the agenda. So you've got to, again, raise a question. If you're going to bring in AI systems into your school, how are you going to account for the fact that they have this huge environmental toll? Training a machine, training a model like GPT-3 uses about 3 months worth of an entire American town's energy consumption. So are you going to offset that in some way, or are you going to interrogate that, or are you going to look for models which have been deliberately built in a more sustainable way, something like a Bloom or a deliberately ethical model? I think that, they're really complex conversations on a policy level, but I think just having those questions there, just framing those questions, probably puts you one step ahead of a kind of a blind or an uncritical adoption of these technologies.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that, and I think most teachers are, in terms of you see it and it's like, wow, like I say, a blind approach to it in terms of what can it do, how can I use it, how can I benefit from it, without really being aware of that part, like the sustainability part, and that's one of the key drivers in Dubai at the moment is, and post Expo is about sustainability. And it was funny enough, again, someone posted, was it World Earth Day? World Earth, it wasn't even a day, was it? It was World Earth Hour the other day. And you've got to think to yourself, geez, an hour, just an hour, given over to these things. And it almost seems ludicrous with the demands that we place on it and what we want to take from it as well. But we do this. We do this all the time, don't we? We do it with petrol. We do it with food and the supply chain distribution of food globally. We do it with pretty much everything that's convenient has some kind of massive ethical problem, which is what makes it convenient or cheap or accessible. So I don't think we're going to solve those problems necessarily, but if we're in education and we're bringing this like young generation of students through and we're introducing them to these technologies, then I think we at least have to be responsible for showing them the ethical side, so that not putting all the responsibility on them, but maybe they'll do a better job of it the next time around than we did. Yeah, you would hope. I had this conversation with my daughter. She loves Teslas, and she said, "I love Teslas," and I was like, and we had this, I guess, from a science perspective, you go into it, and she's, learning about sustainability. They've done about pollution in school, and we see lots of them in Dubai. And she's like, oh, yeah, carbon dioxide. She's like 9, coming on to 10 years old, learning about these things. And I just said to her, but darling, where'd you get the electricity from? And she's like, what do you mean, Daddy? And it's like, well, you can see the cars charging. Yeah. Where's that electricity coming from? And again, I know everyone says, oh, zero carbon emissions, which is a great thing. Great. But the electricity that you're using to fuel this car is still coming from burning fossil fuels. And that's often a misconception. It's like even the creation of the batteries for Teslas and these electric cars, if you look at how they're obtained, how the lithium is used and how to get it, it's quite destructive. And there's often...
And Kate Crawford actually, the book that I mentioned earlier, The Atlas of AI, there's a whole chapter in there around lithium mining in the artificial intelligence industry. And a lot of the infrastructure that AI is built on is underpinned by these really extractive mining technologies and the mining of things like lithium. So yeah, you've got to interrogate that whole supply chain.
It was the same we went through, was it a year and a half ago? Everyone was raving about blockchain, raving about crypto. And then they realized in terms of mining it, and then Elon Musk, funny enough, taking back to Twitter, goes, right, I'm not going to accept it. Obviously in terms of until it's carbon neutral or until it's done in a more sustainable way. And then that draws everyone's attention to it. It's like, hang on a minute, all these computers that are cracking and mining crypto is like using up just reams and reams of power. It's like, yeah. It's like we're guilty of it, aren't we? We just see the surface, see the output, not what's underneath it. That's something I'm definitely going to bring in, going back to the policy part and the challenges for it. I think because I've used it in school and I'm trying to get my students to use it just to sort of trial and error. But we're talking A-level students. But what I have noticed now in class, and we're fortunate in Dubai, bring your own device school. Near enough every student has either a laptop or an iPad, predominantly laptops in secondary. So we're able to give lots of research tasks. We're able to operate on this level of independence. And what I found walking around, specifically with a year 8 class, which for us is 13, 12, 13-year-olds, is instead of now using Google, instead of searching on Google, they go straight to ChatGPT. They go straight to it to find out things, to ask it things. And I said to one of them, I said, you do realize it's only got up to like 2021 knowledge? And they were like, what, really? It's not connected to the internet. And they had no idea. The social media was just said. And it goes back to the skill sets, not just for teachers, but the skill sets that students need of being able to how to use it properly.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, and there's a lot of false information out there. So, LinkedIn, we mentioned earlier, I mainly use LinkedIn. LinkedIn loves a good carousel post of a nice cheery PDF of somebody giving you 10 top tips to do something. And I saw, dozens of posts circulated saying, oh, did you know that ChatGPT can summarize websites if you copy and paste in a website link? And it's a total misunderstanding of how the technology works, because it's not connecting to the website and generating a summary. It's looking at the title of the link and just creating a summary based on what it would think a website with that title in the URL would generate. So students seeing that uncritically might think, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'm just going to take all of these references that my teachers give me and chuck them all into ChatGPT and get summaries, never even open the websites to check. So this, and this comes back to education again, doesn't it? It's how we teach people to use them responsibly, understand what the limitations are, what we should use them for and what we shouldn't. So ChatGPT is a great tool for brainstorming and idea generation and, maybe getting new perspectives on things. It can, to an extent, be used as a bit of like a cheeky grammar checker or something, like a very low rent Grammarly. But it's not a search engine, and it's not a research tool. There are apps coming out like Perplexity and Microsoft's Bing, which market them more in that way and have that connection to the internet. But ChatGPT, it has a use, and it has some things which it can't be used for.
Yeah, I must say I've been using Bing more recently than I have probably ChatGPT, just in terms of, because that's again, that thought process. It's connected to the internet. It will dig out. If I said, can you give me the top 10 of something, it's going to, and what I like about it is it then gives the websites it's used or where it's found this information from. And obviously then you can click on it. I do like, as you saw the other day or last week, about the integration it's now had with DALL-E as well.
Yeah, and I've had a good play around with that.
I've had a great play around. I'm thinking in my head, it's like, oh, great, assist in school for us in design, in terms of science and STEAM, to be able to ideate these images and descriptions. But still not used. What is the main image generator? I can't remember.
Midjourney.
I've not used that.
Is really popular.
I've not used. Is it any good?
Yeah, Midjourney. The output from Midjourney is scarily good. So if you saw any of those fake news posts circulating of Donald Trump being arrested, or the Pope wearing a big white puffer jacket recently, those I believe were Midjourney image generations. So yeah, it's a scarily good technology.
Yeah, I saw someone, funny enough, rings a bell in terms of, mainly from your subject, English, about how you can use the image generators to help depict a scene or create a scene. So you can put in the text, whatever it was specifically, and then use Midjourney or DALL-E to generate that image, and which then you can discuss and describe. So it's one of those things where if you can't, in my opinion, I would struggle to go, how could I use this in science? But then there's always someone out there that go, oh, well, I've used it like this in English, or I've used it like this in another subject, and you can do that with it. And it's like, oh, okay, those little tweaks and methods. And I think as long as there are teachers or, past teachers out there like yourself who are still involved in education and are sharing these ideas, I think, teachers are going to have access to lots of good ideas and ways they can integrate it into their use, their teaching, their planning, whatever it is they do on a day-to-day basis. It's just like we said, ensuring that they're mindful of the ethics, and also that the students themselves get the opportunity to upskill and use it as well.
Yeah, it sounds like we planned this in advance, but we didn't. I've actually got a blog post coming out tomorrow about Midjourney and film studies. So in another life, I was a senior media teacher as well, and my teacher training was English media and drama. So I like to do a little bit of film study stuff every now and again. And I think Midjourney's got really, image generation's got potential, because students can do visual storyboarding. They can, so in this blog post I've got coming out tomorrow, there's a whole kind of, how to generate an establishing sequence in Midjourney, how to control camera angles, how to set up shots of characters, how to get consistent style, all of this stuff that is just, it could be really powerful in education because it's so engaging.
I think that would be good. Because I'm thinking about how would I use it, and going back through, remember we used to give that, right guys, we've got this, write me a comic book strip, remember that? And that could be any subject. From a science perspective, it could depict a scene. And now you can just go, right guys, you need to think about the words you use and, put it into Midjourney or DALL-E and allow it to generate this comic book strip for you. Would be amazing. And then there's the other part to it, which we've not really touched upon to some extent, but I'm really interested in, is the idea of adaptive teaching or differentiation, as it were. Being able to convert either image to text or text to image for students. But that's kind of one of those things as well that's going to be should be a powerful tool for teachers, their ability to differentiate work using AI in general, shouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on the board for a charity here, Reframing Autism. And, I've looked at taking research from Reframing Autism, which is typically really, it's really current. It's focused on inclusive education. It's focused on that kind of autistic lived experience, and how you could put some of that research directly through a ChatGPT or a GPT-4 model and generate like a little differentiating chatbot, that a teacher could just ask ideas to. So I've got an autistic student in my class. We're working on a year 10 unit on photosynthesis. This is what the student needs. Help me. Because we know that one thing that teachers really struggle with, if you've got 27 kids maybe in your class, and probably 10, 12, 15 of them have got their own individual needs, it's really hard to differentiate on the fly for everybody's different needs. So I think where we're heading with that is, the ability to be able to call on a bit of support and get some differentiation on the fly. But I think the ability to provide it with really current and relevant research will be key there, so that it's not just drawing on that old out-of-date data set. Yeah,
you use that term there, like chatbot. And what I found, speaking to some of the people and trying to do my research on it, is that the chatbot and ChatGPT seem to be, and I can again be correct, but two different things, where whenever I've asked it, about, right, how can I use you in education? What should I do? And a lot of them said, personalization or generation of this chatbot is that you would then you can make your own chatbot, but you have to give it so much text. You have to input so much information to it to make it relevant. That's probably going to be the next thing that, programmers or, these companies are going to release. Like for me, if someone said to me, right, we're going to give you an edXL A-level chatbot, you can go onto it. Students, it's got the current spec, it's got all the past exam papers, it's this, and you can use it. But then the friend also said to me, well, what you need to understand is that for all the information you put into it, obviously, and then the output, like you're paying per line or per word of input of information, which again, people necessarily aren't aware of, when they want to talk about these things. So it's going to be interesting for the future about the companies that can come out with that. What kind of leads me into that final question, just to wrap things up in terms of the future of education, the future of AI. Where do you see this going?
I think that the way I would like to see it going is that, personalization on a mass scale, a move away from some of the assessment forms that we know are disengaging and just, they disadvantage students. So a move away from timed, blind, handwritten examinations, a move away from assessing everything with writing. And I'm an English teacher, so I love writing and I love teaching writing, but we never actually teach writing for the sake of it. We only ever teach writing as an assessment tool. We get students to write essays to demonstrate their knowledge of texts. And now we have a machine that can do that just as well as, or even better than students. So we don't need to do that anymore. So I think the future of education is a step away from some of those modes of assessment and towards something which is more personalized and more relevant.
Amazing. Yeah. Anything that takes it more towards skills. From a rugby perspective, I always go skills over drills. Like it's just that phrase and try and bring it into the classroom. But anything like that, I think, is going to be a huge step forward. And there's already lots of people talking about it and advocating for sort of the decrease in assessments or the type of assessment, isn't it? So amazing. Leon, thank you ever so much for your time today. And that insight is just amazing. If anyone does want to sort of follow you more intently, you mentioned LinkedIn. What's your handle on LinkedIn?
I think if you just go to linkedin.com/in/Leon Furze or my website, which is just leonfurze.com. I'm lucky I've got a unique name, so it's easy to find me.
That's really dead easy. Leon Furze. Google him. I think actually I did it. I think it's the first thing that comes up. So SEO content's working fine there.
Good.
But yeah, so people can go there. Blogs are plenty and definitely worth a read. Very insightful things you can take back to your own personal development and to obviously school and departments as well, whether it's in Australia or whether it's international. I think it's all relevant. So thank you again ever so much. Really appreciate you talking to you. I was looking forward to this for a long time. So
thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks,
Take
Alex.
care. A huge thank you to Leon Furze for sharing his expert knowledge and thought-provoking perspectives on the role of artificial intelligence in education. We've explored the benefits of AI in transforming the way we teach and learn. We've delved into the ethical considerations surrounding AI implementation, discussed the challenges and the skill sets required for teachers to adapt to this rapidly evolving landscape, and we've contemplated the future of assessment in an AI-driven world. We hope that this conversation has not only sparked your curiosity, but also provided valuable insights to help you navigate the exciting possibilities that lie ahead in the realm of education. Thank you for tuning into the International Classroom. We appreciate your continued support, and we hope that you'll join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to delve into fascinating topics and engage with global leaders in education. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on social media to stay updated on our latest episodes and conversations. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and making a difference in the world of education.